With Constitution Day and the election coming up, the right to vote is one of our most important constitutional rights. Attorney Tom Sinas joins us now to discuss just how important it is. And Tom, we know a lot of people are ready to exercise this right, either in person or by mail this November.
That's right. And it just so happens that every time this year in September of every year, we celebrate Constitution Day. So I thought, what a better part of the Constitution to talk about and celebrate than the right to vote. And what's interesting, when you look actually at the Constitution itself, it doesn't actually say that citizens have the right to vote. Of course, over the years, the Supreme Court, over many, many decades, has ruled that it is a fundamental right of a U.S. citizen to be able to vote in an election. But of course, what really stands out when you look back at the Constitution from the time it was originally written is who was it that was allowed to vote and who has had to get the right to vote over time. Of course, when the country was founded, the people who were allowed to vote were people who looked like me, white men. And as you look at the various amendments to the Constitution, that's where you start to see the right to vote, this critical democratic right, being given to people who did not have the right. So of course, with the 15th Amendment, we start giving the right to vote to people who have been formerly enslaved. The 19th Amendment in 1920, 100 years ago, women get the right to vote. The 24th Amendment, that doesn't take effect until 1964. That eliminates the poll tax. And in 1971, in the height of the Vietnam War, it's not until that time that 18-year-olds get the right to vote. So what you see when you step back here is a constitutional right that we all view as sacred, and yet there are these groups of people who have had to wait and get that right to vote given to them by the Constitution as the Constitution evolves.
It's interesting to hear the history of this very important right, Tom, especially, as a minority, as a woman. It's especially fascinating to hear, but that was so many years ago. But what jumps out to you now about the dynamics that are still relevant here today?
Well, we're still talking and debating about exercising the right to vote. And some of these concepts, like the poll tax, for example, this continues to come up in debates about people accessing the ballot box. For example, it's been discussed in the debates over vote by mail. It's also been discussed down in Florida, for example, whether formerly convicted felons could vote, and if so, did they have to pay the fines associated with their criminal cases. And then, of course, there's all sorts of discussion, and there has been over the years, about what types of identification is required. So even though we have the right to vote, and we all understand it to be sacrosanct, the nuances of how that right is implemented is something that we are continuing to discuss, and hopefully we will never stop debating, given how fundamental a right it is to our democracy.
And absolutely not a right to take for granted at all with the upcoming election. How can people get more information, Tom?
Well, I think up on the screen there's information about our law firm, but I'm not going to direct people there. I want to direct people actually to the Michigan Secretary of State's website. And why? Well, I want people to make sure that they're registered to vote. You don't have to, as of 2018, you don't have to be registered in advance of Election Day, but there's no reason not to if you plan to vote. So go to the Michigan Secretary of State's website, see if you're registered to vote. If not, get registered to vote so you can exercise that utmost constitutional responsibility that we all have.
It is critical. Attorney Tom Sinas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Janice.